So to help unpack all these contrasting views, it's a pleasure to welcome to studio security analyst Yaakov Lapin, host of the Ross Handler Report, and Dan Perry, international affairs analyst and former Europe and Middle East editor at the Associated Press. Gentlemen, thank you both so much. So Washington, Tehran, Islamabad, and Doha, in effect, shaping this framework with massive implications for Israel. Concerning, what is your take, Dan Perry, on the latest developments we're hearing right now?
Well, first of all, everything said in public should be taken with a grain of salt. Trump says the Iranians agreed to accept inspectors. Trump also said Hamas agreed to disarm. So, you know, it's a risky proposition to bet the farm on what Trump said. Meanwhile, the Iranians have never told the truth in the middle of a complex negotiation. So the public stuff is, you know, essentially texture. If it really blows up, we'll know it blew up, and it hasn't blown up yet. The Iranians clearly identify that Trump is desperate to end the war and end any prospect of any further blocking of the Strait of Hormuz and any further paralyzing of the Persian Gulf in general. So desperate is he that he's projecting it rather clearly, and the Iranians identifying this are pushing the envelope very, very, very far. They're giving him almost nothing. And look, the Americans have already basically conceded totally on the war aims that included, for example, ballistic missiles, proxy militias, democratic reforms maybe, never mind regime change. They're actually talking indirectly about reparations, which when I first heard from the Iranians, I thought was sort of a joke. $300 billion fund.
$300 billion.
It's beyond belief. All Trump is getting is an opening of the strait that was opened before the war and something, anything on a nuclear file. And now the Iranians are denying even this. So here's what I have to say. Trump has gone into this undignified posture because of politics. He didn't want to suffer the consequences for the Republican Party in the midterms of high oil prices and inflation and all kinds of other downstream consequences of a global economic crisis. That's clear. But the Iranians can push him too far. There's a line in The Godfather Part 2 where a mafioso says, "A man in my position cannot afford to look ridiculous." The Iranians are making Trump look ridiculous. And, you know, he may not be a philosopher, but he has the best instinct in the world at what his perception is, and he knows this. And I think if they push him too far, just as he flipped on Netanyahu, he may also flip on Kalibaf, Pezeshkian, and Mujtaba.
Your concerns, Yaakov Lapin, exactly what Dan is saying. What happens in 60 days' time? What could happen?
Yeah, obviously we don't know. Let's not try to predict. I agree with the concerns that Dan has put forward. I think that these are the primary concerns with everything that the Trump administration has done. The test for Israel, in my view, right now primarily lies in Lebanon. Israel has a new security doctrine, and that doctrine says that civilians will not face jihadist terrorist armies on the other side of the border, that the IDF is not going to give up security zones until it knows for sure that a responsible military force that's not under the control of Iran is on the other side of that border. We don't have that situation in Lebanon. We're not even close to having that situation in Lebanon. And that's why it's critical, in my view, that Israel makes it very clear to the Trump administration that it is not going to compromise on this doctrine, whatever the price may be. I think that Trump has got to realize that Israel is not the weakest chain in this link that he can, shake down. And once he sees that, hopefully he will back off with this attempt to pressure Israel to give up a vital security interest just to make this a very flawed MOU work. Israel should not be expected to pay the price for this very, very flawed diplomacy. And this is why, I've been saying for, I think, probably over a year now that the art of the deal does not apply to jihadists. It really doesn't. And now it seems that President Trump will discover that on his own.
Dan.
Yeah, I agree with you. That doctrine makes sense, and we all know why it's necessary. And of course, Israel cannot withdraw to the international border when the result is Hezbollah coming back. But I don't know if Hezbollah would come back. And there is an open question about how far inside Lebanon Israel needs to be, because a very deep buffer zone does not destroy Hezbollah and does not prevent Hezbollah from firing rockets at Israel from near Baalbek, 200 kilometers to the north. And Israel can't occupy half of Lebanon or more. So there's a real discussion there, and doing things as we have been doing for 45 years, depending only on ourselves in Lebanon and no one else, may be unwise. But one other thing I quickly wanted to say, it's more than just what happens in Lebanon. It's what happens with Israel in general. When you have a precedent set where things that have to do with Israel's security posture and Israel's security needs and doctrine are being determined not just by America, treating Israel like a vassal and a client state, but by Iran. Iran is at the table and Israel's not, which is insane. And this is happening because of the miscalculations that brought us here regarding what to do about the Strait of Hormuz. And if it's accepted, and if it is seen as something that the U.S. was able to finesse, and Israel completely falls, then Israel's deterrence on every front will be very badly eroded.
Stan Perry, I'd like your take on the blitz trip that Marco Rubio is taking on as we speak. He landed in the UAE just a short while ago. He's going to Bahrain and Kuwait as well. We know they were targeted repeatedly by Iran during this war. They're also important allies. What do you make of the fact, firstly, that this blitz trip does not involve a stop in Jerusalem at all? Once again, Israel completely sidelined by the process. And secondly, the fact that he gets to do this trip while J.D. Vance is busy with the apparent negotiation efforts with Iran.
It certainly isn't good news for Israel that it's being ignored on what is the highest level administration trip to the region in the middle of the negotiations, indeed in the first week of the actual negotiations. America has some explaining to do with the Gulf countries because it embroiled them in the war on promises that ended up going unfulfilled. And for a while, in many cases, UAE in particular, there was some hawkishness about supporting the war to the end because of real hope that the U.S. and Israel had some plan of bringing down the regime. That flipped the minute it became clear that especially when Trump basically called off the Kurdish gambit, when it became clear that there is no plan to bring down the regime and there's no real ability to protect them, oddly short of Israeli anti-missile batteries that were sent to the UAE, they began to desperately want the war to end and to cut their losses. And at this point, these countries, their entire business model is based on the idea that they're peaceful and stable, and they're not being attacked by jihadist maniacs. And I mean, if you are, that's no way to attract British and German and French and Japanese business people to come to Dubai and ski on your mountain. So something has to give, and the U.S. has to explain what it plans to do going forward. And I suspect, in fact, I know that these countries are happy that at least the war is over for now, but they're not happy that Iran has been strengthened. And no matter what Trump says, no matter the spin, I don't know of anyone in the world who believes that the U.S. has achieved its war aims and that Iran, the regime, has not been strengthened by all this, both by surviving the onslaught of Israel and the U.S., arguably by some measures, the two best armies in the world, and by getting all this money, perhaps close to $500 billion coming in. So the Gulfies, who are going to be asked to provide some of this money, or at least be a conduit for it, are part of the equation. Israel's not. Of course, you can always pick up the phone, but I think there's a message here in the public diplomacy aspect of Israel being so studiously ignored.
Yaakov, it is incomprehensible to think that these assets are going to be used in reality, potentially, to fund Hezbollah to continue doing what it is doing across the northern front, and Israel's security wings have been clipped.
Well, look, we're in day 2 or 3 of a ceasefire in Lebanon. It's too soon, in my view, to say that Israel's security wings have been clipped. We also had a security incident this morning where 2 Hezbollah cells were taken out by the IDF proactively. There's no question that now Israel is observing a ceasefire in order to avoid being blamed for a potential collapse of the MOU, which I'm not sure anybody in Jerusalem would be particularly sad to see collapse, but we don't necessarily want to be the ones that catch the blame for that scenario if it comes to pass. I think we have to be very cautious before drawing sweeping conclusions because the situation is so dynamic. As Dan said, President Trump can flip on a dime. He can turn on a dime. He's done it multiple times, and he can do it again. So if we want to look at the situation of Hezbollah, yes, the scenario of IRGC money coming back to it is a disturbing one and one that we have to prepare for. But at the same time, let's also take stock of where Hezbollah is today. It has lost more than 80, possibly 85% of its firepower. I will remind the viewers that we were all pretty shaken by predictions of what Hezbollah could do to the skyline of Tel Aviv, its ability to launch mass raids into northern Israel by death squads. That ability has been almost completely destroyed. And also the Shiite base, hundreds of thousands of Lebanese Shiites who are the base of Hezbollah have been basically evacuated from southern Lebanon for their own safety. This is a huge blow to Hezbollah's idea that it's the defender of Lebanon and defender of the Shiites. So when we make net assessments of where Hezbollah is, I think we have to notice that it's a much, much weaker organization, and there are disturbing scenarios on the horizon that we have to prepare for. But I think the situation is a lot more complicated than Hezbollah is going to be back tomorrow to where it was. I think that's totally unrealistic.
30 seconds, parting thoughts.
Even though Hezbollah and Hamas have been degraded, the fact that they're still around and still can cause damage is undoubtedly a huge failure in a war that no Israeli would have signed on to in the beginning, and that many would conclude was not worth the incredible sacrifice of the reputational damage and the lives lost and the disruption to the economy.
Thank you so much, Dan Perry, Yaakov Lapin. Appreciate your insights. Thank you so much for being here.